Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a place that smells faintly of smoked eel, old ale, and something much worse lurking in the gutters. You're standing on a narrow, mucky street in 1352 London, clutching an almost stale loaf of barley bread you definitely didn't pay for. The market around you bustles with noise, traders shouting over each other, children darting between carts, and somewhere not too far away a bell tolls ominously. And that's when you realize someone saw you. Now, if you're thinking a quick dash around the corner will save you, think again. You're not just in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're in medieval England as a petty criminal, and every inch of this city is ready to chew you up and spit you out, preferably in front of a jeering crowd. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world you're unwinding from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the loaf in your hands go heavier with guilt, or maybe it's just soaked from the drizzle. The man who caught your eye yells, and instantly, 5 others look your way, strangers, potential witnesses, potential accusers. And in this world, accusation is nearly everything. You break into a jog, then a run, cobblestones slippery, your shoes soaked through. You duck into an alley that smells like old fish and bad decisions. Behind you, voices rise, some angry, some excited, because let's face it, chasing a thief makes a dull morning interesting. You turn left, then right, past a tanner's workshop, don't breathe too deep there, and finally slide to a stop near the edge of the Thames, trying to think. You're a criminal now, technically, for a loaf of bread. But let's rewind slightly. Because to understand how truly doomed you are, we need to explore what being a criminal meant in this particular era. Spoiler alert, it's not like today, with your lawyers and your reasonable doubt. No, you've stepped into a legal ecosystem that's part mob justice, part divine guessing game, and part deeply superstitious drama. First, you'll quickly find that there's no centralized police force, no detectives coming to interview witnesses. Law enforcement in 1352 is mostly your neighbors yelling at each other and pointing fingers. Justice is a community project, enthusiastic but inconsistent. Second, crimes aren't classified so much as interpreted. That loaf of bread might count as theft, or sacrilege, or even treason depending on where you stole it and who saw you. The same act could get you a slap on the wrist in York or hanged in Norwich. Third, your social class matters a lot. If you were the son of a baker or miller, they might let you off with a fine. If you're dirt poor and look shifty, which, let's be honest, you probably do right now, well, things get stickier. You try to clean your hands on your tunic, then remember your tunic is also stolen. Oops. As you walk quickly, definitely not running, you start to notice the signs of how England treats its petty offenders. Stocks in the marketplace, iron collars nailed to wooden posts, even a pillory where someone's still locked in, head sagging forward in either shame or sleep. A kid throws a turnip at him. The kid misses, hits a chicken. The chicken is not impressed. You slink farther into the city's winding streets, wondering who, if anyone, might help you. A sympathetic monk, a secret network of underground thieves? More likely, a bored constable who sees you, shrugs, and decides today's the day he earns his cider money. And here's where the medieval part really kicks in. If you get caught, and trust me, you'll be brought before a local court that's less courtroom drama and more village gossip hour. The proceedings are public, the punishments theatrical, and the verdict often predetermined by whoever yells the loudest or prays the longest. You're wondering now, how did people survive this? Some didn't. Some found clever loopholes pretending to be clergy works better than you'd think, but most simply hoped they weren't poor, unlucky, or unpopular that week. You pass by a tavern. It smells like mead and arguments. Outside it, a weathered sign reads, "No brawling after Vespers." You wonder what happens before Vespers. Someone grabs your shoulder. A heavy-set man in a muddy cloak, eyes squinting, voice like gravel. "That your bread?" You stare at him. His hand tightens. He smells like turnips and judgment. You mumble something. He raises an eyebrow. Then, a woman across the street yells, "He ran from the market." And that's it. The crowd forms faster than your thoughts. Someone grabs your arm. Another starts calling for the reeve. You hear gallows in the mix. Someone suggests they check your teeth for reasons you don't want to know. And just like that, you've become medieval England's favorite sport. Public justice with a touch of humiliation. Don't worry, though. It gets worse. You wake up in a dim, damp room that smells like moldy straw, spoiled ale, and maybe something once alive, but long forgotten. Your back aches. Your wrists are sore, tied too tightly by someone who thought knots were a personal art form. Above you, a sliver of gray daylight filters in through a high, iron-grated window the size of a rat. Not that a rat would fit. They've grown too plump in here. Welcome to your first morning in a medieval holding cell, tucked beneath one of London's countless timber-framed buildings. Technically, it's not a jail in the modern sense. It's more of a storage unit for suspects, a cramped room where bodies pile up faster than charges are written down. You glance around. Your cellmates are a colorful bunch. One man who talks to his thumb, a washerwoman accused of selling sour milk, and two pickpockets who whisper like they're planning to build a time machine. Everyone stinks, including you, especially you. Now let's talk about law enforcement, or rather, the distinct lack thereof. In this part of history, there's no police force patrolling with shiny buttons and moral clarity. Instead, justice is a group hobby. If someone sees you steal something, they shout, and suddenly the whole village transforms into a medieval manhunt. You'll hear the cry of "Stop thief," or "Hue and cry," and like clockwork, every able-bodied man in earshot is legally obliged to chase you, under penalty of also being fined if they don't. Think of it as the worst neighborhood watch in history. Once caught, you're typically handed off to the local reeve, an unpaid part-time official whose main qualifications are owns a stick and yells convincingly. He writes your name into a ledger misspelling optional, and delivers you to a holding cell like the one you're now enjoying. But here's the kicker. You're not here because you're guilty. You're here because someone accused you, and in medieval England, that's more than enough to ruin your week. Out in the street, justice is loud. But inside this holding cell, it's slow. There's no bail system, no phone call, no one coming to explain your rights because technically you don't have any. If your trial is tomorrow, you're lucky. If it's next month, that's par for the course. Some people rot in cells like this for years, simply because no one got around to scheduling a hearing. One of your cellmates, let's call him Bartholomew, leans over and offers you a turnip. He says, "It's blessed, maybe." You take it because blessed or not, it's food. As the hours stretch on, you try to remember what you know about English law. You recall something vague about Magna Carta and fair trials, but that mostly applies to nobles. You are, quite unfortunately, not a noble. You are a street-scuffed commoner with a crust of bread for evidence. Eventually, you hear heavy boots on the stairs. Two men appear, one with a lantern, the other with a stick. They call names like they're reading a very poorly organized dinner reservation list. Your name is not called. You ask the man with the lantern when your trial will be. He shrugs. When the justices ride through again, I suppose. Ah yes, the assize courts. Traveling judges who sweep through town like bureaucratic comets, delivering trials in batches. They're supposed to visit every few months. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they die en route. Sometimes they're drunk. Either way, until they arrive, you sit and stew and smell worse. At this point, it's worth noting something. Medieval justice was less about rehabilitation and more about performance. People didn't just want wrongs to be righted, they wanted to see it happen. Loudly, publicly, with props ideally. Which means your upcoming trial, whenever it happens, won't be in some quiet chamber with hushed lawyers and thick books. It'll be on a raised platform, with half the town watching, and possibly someone selling meat pies nearby. Back in your cell, a rooster crows. You have no idea if it's morning or if someone's just keeping poultry in the hallway. Either feels plausible. You ask Bartholomew how long he's been here. He scratches his beard, considers it, and says, "What month is it?" You don't know either. Eventually, the reeve reappears. He squints at a tattered scroll, peers at you like he half remembers your crime, and says, "Baker's boy says you ran with his loaf." You nod, or shrug, or both. At this point, your body just does what it wants. He scribbles something, probably thief, and tells you to be ready. "They'll want a confession," he mutters, like he's discussing a weather forecast. Sooner confessed, sooner you're out or hanged, one of the two. You ask, "What if I'm innocent?" He laughs, not cruelly, just tiredly. "Innocent people don't steal bread," he says, then adds, "and guilty ones never admit it, so really, what's the difference?" You wonder if that's supposed to be comforting. It's not. Then again, medieval justice isn't about comfort. It's about surviving the system long enough to see daylight, and maybe getting your hands back on that bread. Outside, the bell tolls again, once, twice. That means something. Probably bad. You're finally marched out of the holding cell, blinking against a dull gray sky. Your legs are stiff, your tunic sticks to your back in unpleasant places, and your turnip, your blessed turnip, is gone, probably stolen by the man who talks to his thumb. You don't know what time it is, or what day, or even what month, but you do know something's about to happen, something official. Two men lead you through the streets, the reeve and a tithing man, both of them sporting crooked teeth and the kind of mustaches that suggest they drink more than they bathe. A small crowd trails behind, just close enough to look nosy but not close enough to get involved yet. You're being taken to what passes for a courthouse in your town. Spoiler, it's a barn, a literal one. Inside, hay has been pushed to the sides, benches set up for the townsfolk. In the front, a large table holds scrolls, a chipped inkwell, and the biggest candle you've ever seen, because nothing says due process like beeswax and fire hazards. At the head of the room sits the local Lord's steward, not a trained judge, but a man with good handwriting and a better hat. He presides over the session with the confidence of someone who once saw an actual court and has been improvising ever since. And now, justice begins. If you're imagining a solemn procession, hushed tones, and balanced arguments, don't. In this world, legal procedure is theatrical, communal, and incredibly chaotic. Let's break it down. In medieval England, especially in rural towns, the law lives mostly in people's heads. There are written laws, yes, some of them inherited from the Normans, some scribbled by monks in Latin, but for the average peasant, law means what everyone agrees it is that week. There's no professional police force, no reliable lawyers, and most importantly, no clear definition of proof. Someone says you stole a loaf of bread, that's enough to drag you to trial. Someone else says they saw you give the bread to a beggar, that's enough to maybe reduce your sentence. A third person says, "I didn't see it, but he looks shifty," that somehow counts too. The truth in medieval court is like porridge. Everyone stirs in their opinion and hopes it sticks. You're told to kneel, not because it's respectful, but because it's uncomfortable, and discomfort is half the point of justice here. A man announces your name, botches it, corrects it, then glances at you like it's your fault your parents chose something so unspellable. Then come the accusations. The baker steps forward. He points at you with dramatic flair and says something along the lines of, "He stole it straight from my stall, bold as brass. I saw it with my own eyes, and I want the law to take him." Everyone murmurs. Then someone from the crowd pipes up, "He ran toward the fishmonger after. No one asked, but now it's in the record." A woman, your neighbor's cousin's niece maybe, adds, "I saw him just last week throwing stones at pigeons. Wicked child." It has nothing to do with this, but the crowd loves it. More murmurs. You feel your case unraveling with every side comment. Here's the strange part. This is normal. In medieval courts, the community plays a huge role in shaping the outcome, not just by testifying, but by expressing general vibes. If enough people believe you're guilty, it almost doesn't matter what the actual crime was. Let's introduce a fun term, compurgation. It sounds fancy, but it's basically a medieval popularity contest. You can sometimes avoid punishment by swearing your innocence and bringing along a group of people, oath helpers, who swear you're generally a good egg. If enough people vouch for you, the court might just let it go. Unfortunately for you, the only person who might have vouched for you was that turnip guy, and he's back in the cell, arguing with his thumb. You have no oath helpers, no family here, no bribes to offer. You are, legally and emotionally, toast. The steward taps his pen against the table and asks, "Do you confess?" This is where things get murky. See, confession holds enormous weight in medieval law, not because it's more truthful, but because it's more convenient. A confession speeds things up. It saves paperwork. It also justifies any punishment that follows, no matter how severe. And here's the twist. You might not even have to speak. If you remain silent long enough, the court might presume guilt by obstinate refusal. Some courts go even further. They literally torture silence out of you. Ever heard of peine forte et dure? It's where they stack heavy stones on your chest until you speak, or die, whichever comes first. You speak. You say, "I was hungry." The crowd murmurs again, this time some with pity. But pity is fleeting. The steward nods solemnly and declares, "Theft by confession, 1 loaf, to be judged according to the common custom." You want to ask what that means, but no one answers. Because it depends. If this town has a stockade, you'll be locked in it for a day while children throw things at you. If there's a scarcer supply of drama this week, they might strap a wooden plaque to your chest that says, "Thief," and parade you through the market. If the stewards had a bad morning, you might lose an ear. It all depends. And that's the essence of justice in 1352. Fluid, loud, deeply local, and entirely unpredictable. As they lead you out of the barn, you catch snatches of gossip from the onlookers. Some say you got off easy. Others say it should have been the stocks. One man seems disappointed there wasn't a hanging. You, meanwhile, are just glad it's over, kind of. Because while the trial is done, your punishment is only beginning. And by nightfall, you'll learn that in this system, surviving the sentence is only half the battle. You're standing in the center of the town square now, strapped into a curious contraption made of wood, iron, and inspoken social shame. It's called the pillory, and it's less about pain and more about performance. Your head and arms are locked forward through 3 round holes, which is as uncomfortable as it sounds, and no, you cannot scratch your nose. A crude wooden plaque hangs from your neck, swinging with the breeze, "Thief of bread." Someone has drawn a sad loaf beside it, which honestly feels like overkill. Children are already circling like crows with pockets full of spoiled fruit. Someone throws a parsnip, another throws what might have once been a fish. Someone else shouts, "Steal this, followed by a potato with great personal velocity. You close your eyes, it doesn't help. The stocks and their cousin, the pillory, are as medieval as dragons and flagons of ale, and they're used for the same purpose. Shame first, questions later. Your sentence isn't intended to rehabilitate you. It's meant to make you a lesson. A small wiggling warning sign for anyone nearby with wandering hands or a hunger for free bread. And the system loves a spectacle. People don't just pass by these public punishments, they schedule around them. Mothers bring children. Vendors hawk cheap pies. The town's morality seems to rise in direct proportion to your humiliation. But here's the truth they don't tell you. You're not the only one suffering. Let's zoom out. Because while you drool onto a questionable cobblestone, a bigger, stranger truth reveals itself. The legal system in medieval England isn't broken. It's working exactly the way it was built to. And it was built oddly. The core of your predicament stems from a time when law was personal property, a landowner's tool to protect what's his, not to protect you. Courts emerged out of necessity, usually linked to land disputes or property lines, and criminal justice was tacked on later like a crooked chimney. Punishment wasn't about balance. It was about message, and the message was usually, "Don't do this, or you'll end up like this person with turnip juice in their hair." That's you, by the way. Now, about those public punishments. The pillory is reserved for things the town considers morally irritating. Theft, gossiping, cheating waits at the market, or making bad bread. Yes, bad bread was a charge. Ask the assize of bread and ale, a real, very fussy medieval law. The stocks, in contrast, are more for general disorder. Drunkenness, brawling, not showing up to church, or saying rude things about the king's haircut. Stocks pin your ankles, so you sit with your legs locked and your dignity gently leaking out. There's also the scold's bridle, a horrible iron mask used mostly on women accused of nagging. It's medieval patriarchy with a handle on top. But for now, you get to enjoy the classic, the pillory. 2 hours by the town clock, or, failing that, until the church bell rings thrice. You try to tune it out. A bee lands on your cheek. You consider the sting as a viable distraction. In the crowd, an old woman squints at you. She looks at your plaque, then at your face, then sighs deeply, like she's remembering her own wayward bread years. She tosses you a soft apple. It misses, but the gesture is appreciated. Time passes oddly in the pillory. The world moves in waves. People come and go, the light changes, your knees complain more loudly than usual. Someone from the Reeves household comes to check that you're still conscious. He doesn't help you, but he does nod in satisfaction. Justice, you assume, has been officially served. Behind the crowd, a group of men argue about whether you were the same thief who stole fish last week. One man says you were taller then. Another insists your nose was definitely guiltier. It doesn't matter what they decide. Because medieval punishment doesn't require consistency, just community participation. Whether you're guilty, innocent, or just unlucky, once you're in the pillory, you are the story. A symbol of law, or hunger, or bad luck, or all three mashed together like peas on a trench plate. Eventually, the bell rings. 3 times. It's over. 2 young men, apprentices maybe, come and unlatch the pillory. You wobble forward, arms numb, head light. You're not officially a criminal anymore. You're a former criminal, which unfortunately is still just as bad. Because now we enter the real punishment, life after punishment. You walk through the village, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. But the looks follow you, the whispers, the wide steps people take around you. You're marked now not just by the plaque, but by reputation. And here's the twist: medieval society remembers. Unlike modern records that vanish or get sealed, your criminality is now part of your living history. You might get hired again someday, but not easily. You might find someone to marry, but probably someone equally desperate. You're no longer part of the normal rhythm. You're an outlier, and there's no system in place to help you back in. In some towns, former criminals are forced to wear special clothing. In others, they must swear to leave the village entirely. If you return, you're subject to violence, exile, or worse, more trials. And so you sit once more near the edge of the market square, hands blistered, tunic ruined, no bread, no friends, and no idea what happens next. But it's only noon, and the day has plenty more medieval justice in store. You're huddled under the eaves of a crooked thatched roof, trying to stay dry, warm, and invisible all at once. A drizzle clings to the air like regret, and the cobblestones beneath you are slick with the usual cocktail of water, manure, and civic indifference. Your sentence is served, but your punishment continues, because in medieval England, being seen as a criminal is a life sentence of its own. And today, the crowd is still talking. Not just about you, of course. There's also that poor man who got caught weighing down his flour sacks with chalk, and the boy who broke into a pigeon coop and got locked in a barrel for a day. But your bread-thieving fiasco remains the local favorite. It's been spun into 3 different versions already, and you've been upgraded from hungry thief to bread bandit, and even the yeast demon, by one particularly dramatic cheese vendor. You want to run, leave this village, start fresh. But here's the catch: you can't. Because medieval England doesn't have a public transportation system. There's no helpful sign that says next town, 12 miles this way. And if you're wandering without a letter of permission, a local contact, or something that proves you're allowed to be where you're going, you're likely to get hauled right back or worse. That's where the watch system comes in. Let's talk about the glorious non-existence of police. Instead of trained officers or law enforcement, your average English town in the 1300s relies on a system of rotating, reluctant civilians tasked with keeping the peace. Every night, men from the community are assigned to patrol the streets, armed with a cudgel, a lantern, and about 2 ounces of motivation. These are the night watchmen, and despite their heroic title, most of them would rather be asleep. Some are half-drunk, many are illiterate, a few just use the opportunity to shake down unlucky travelers for a penny or 2. They wander the streets yelling, "All's well," every hour or so, and if they see someone suspicious, you, for instance, they shout, "Who goes there?" If you don't answer promptly and correctly, they have full authority to drag you to the local reeve or lock you in the stocks again. So when the sun dips behind the clouds and the shadows grow long, you find yourself hiding once more, this time, not because you're a thief, but because you look like one. This system, known as the hue and cry, empowers every citizen to be law enforcement. If someone sees a crime, they are legally obligated to raise the cry, and everyone else is legally obligated to join the chase. It sounds empowering. It is mostly terrifying. And it means that one man with bad vision and a loud voice could ruin your week just by yelling, "Thief," after mistaking you for someone else. Even worse, the court expects you to prove your innocence, not the other way around. You've probably heard of innocent until proven guilty. Not here. In medieval England, the assumption leans firmly toward, well, he looks the type. Theoretically, you could appeal. You could find someone with status to speak on your behalf, a guildsman, a knight, even a cleric. But those kinds of people don't speak for you. They barely see you. You're not in a guild, You own nothing, you were caught stealing, you smell like public shame and yesterday's soup. So instead of appealing, you disappear. You walk for hours past hedgerows, over footpaths, slipping from one hamlet to another, hoping to find a place where your name isn't mud and your face isn't infamous. And somewhere along the way, as you pass a roadside shrine with a half-burnt candle and a rusted cup full of nettles, you realize something strange. You're not alone. There are others like you. People labeled as vagabonds, wanderers, petty thieves, expelled apprentices. People who live between the structures of society, never quite part of anything, never quite trusted, but too many to ignore. And together, they form a kind of unofficial underclass, a community of the unwanted. You meet a man who once stole shoes and now sells onions door to door, no permit in sight. You meet a woman who fled a town where they accused her of witchcraft because her bread didn't rise. You meet a boy who's been pretending to be mute for 3 years because silence is safer. This is where the criminal class really lives, not in jails or on gallows, but in this liminal zone between law and survival. They're not villains, they're just not good at pretending the world makes sense. You're one of them now. And it's in their stories, told in whispers by smoky fires and under hedgerows, that you start to learn just how absurd, tangled, and human medieval justice truly is. One woman tells you about a man who escaped hanging by faking his death with the help of a friendly monk and a pig bladder full of blood. Another man says he once avoided the stocks by singing a hymn so convincingly they mistook him for clergy. Historians still argue whether some of these tricks actually worked or if they're just the folklore of the forgotten. But one thing's clear: survival in this era isn't about following the law, it's about navigating it. And you, newly minted bread thief and social exile, are learning fast. But you're also tired. You lie down under a hedge, the stars poking holes in the darkness above. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls again. Not for you, not this time. You close your eyes and sleep, not because you're safe or free, but because medieval England is exhausting. And tomorrow you'll have to decide, try to start again, or disappear deeper into the shadows. You wake up cold, damp, and distinctly annoyed by the dew that has somehow soaked through your cloak, your tunic, and possibly your soul. Morning in the English countryside is quieter than the village, but not peaceful. Birds argue. A cow stares at you with unflattering curiosity. Somewhere nearby, someone is chopping wood with the urgency of someone who owes firewood taxes. You stretch, or try to. Your body reminds you that pillories, public humiliation, and a night sleeping on twigs are not part of any recommended wellness regimen. You stand, brush off what you hope is just dirt, and start walking again. You don't know where you're going, and frankly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're not in the town where everyone knows your name and has seen you drooling in public with a loaf of bread drawn around your neck. After an hour, you spot smoke curling from a chimney ahead, a small hamlet. 4 houses, a well, and a pig that looks suspiciously like it's judging you. You slow your steps, deciding whether to beg, barter, or just blend in. But then you remember something you overheard in the stocks. There's a bounty on vagabonds these days. Ah yes, time to talk about one of medieval England's most charming hobbies, bounty hunting. You see, the kingdom doesn't pay sheriffs very well, nor does it have the infrastructure to chase down every peasant who steals a chicken or flees a punishment, so naturally it outsources justice. Anyone, yes, anyone can capture a criminal and bring them in for a reward. It's justice meets capitalism meets, this feels slightly unsafe. And the best part, the definition of criminal is extremely flexible. If someone thinks you might have broken the law, or looks like someone who did, or just happens to be poor and traveling alone, well, congratulations, you're worth money now. You walk past the pig, which continues judging, and enter the hamlet cautiously. A man chopping wood nods at you. You nod back, he squints. You resist the urge to squint back harder. Traveling far? He asks. Just passing through, you say, trying to sound casual, trustworthy, and slightly holy. He nods again, slower this time. Inside your brain, medieval sirens start wailing. You're probably fine, probably. But in 1352, the community justice system means this man could right now call for the reeve or form a posse comitatus. Yes, it's a real phrase. Latin for everyone grab a stick and chase that guy. This wasn't just for entertainment. It was expected. Citizens had a duty to apprehend wrongdoers, and failure to help could earn you a fine or a lecture from the parish priest, which might be worse. These citizen-led arrests were chaotic at best, dangerous at worst. There was little training, no oversight, and a tendency to skip the talk first, swing later step. In the distance, you hear a voice yell something. It might be your imagination, or it might be the start of a hue and cry. You don't wait to find out. You leave the hamlet before your name can be remembered. You pass into fields, woods, and the strangely liminal space of the English countryside, where law thins out and stories get weirder. And that's where you find them. A group, 5 men and women, sitting by a smoky fire beside a ruined Roman wall. Their clothes are patched, their faces wary, but they nod when you approach. They don't ask questions. They just offer you a bit of broth that tastes like wet socks and community. This is the informal underworld, not criminals in the modern sense, but survivors of the system. People who have been arrested, fined, accused, or simply born on the wrong side of land ownership. They tell stories. One man with a beard like a thistle says he was accused of stealing geese but only ever saw one. Must have bred on the way to court, he shrugs. A woman tells you she once escaped custody by marrying the man sent to arrest her. He had nice eyes, she explains. Terrible sense of direction. Historians still argue whether this underclass was as organized as later outlaw bands like Robin Hood's Merry Men. Some think these were isolated individuals. Others suggest informal networks, proto-gangs that offered mutual protection and barter economies, stolen tools for food, gossip for warnings, shelter in exchange for silence. What's certain is this: they survived, not because they were strong but because they were nimble. Medieval law was loud, but not omnipresent. In towns and market squares, it rang with authority. In the woods and borderlands, it faded into something more mythical, more about tradition than statute. Here, a man can be a thief in one county, a hero in the next, and a forgotten story in the third. Which is why, when someone says there's a traveling judge coming through the next village, your new companions scatter like geese at harvest. The arrival of a circuit judge, part of the royal heir system, is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, these judges bring structure, and sometimes actual fairness. On the other, they bring records, and if your name's in one, well, the rope's already half-tied. You walk again. Past a windmill. Past a cow chewing its cud with existential apathy. Past a woman hanging laundry and singing a song about a knight who married a goose, you think. You're still wearing the same tunic, still feeling the pillory in your shoulders. And you realize something. You don't even miss the bread. You miss being ordinary. The greatest punishment in medieval England isn't the stocks or the whip or even the gallows. It's being pushed outside the story. Justice here isn't just about punishment. It's about status, about being known, named, and trusted. Once you're out, it's hard to get back in. And so you keep walking. Because if you can find a place where no one knows your face, where no one asks about a loaf, and where pigs don't stare at you like disapproving uncles, you might just find something better than innocence. You might find peace. By now, your feet have adopted a kind of permanent ache, less a pain, and more a grumbling reminder that they are done with you. But they keep going, because they must. You've walked through 3 villages, 2 bogs, and 1 suspiciously aggressive goose commune, and you're no closer to safety than when you started. But at last, something breaks the monotony. You arrive at a market fair. The sounds hit you first, lutes and laughter, clanging iron, and the unmistakable squelch of boots in mud. Then the smells, roasted meat, ale-soaked breath, and an alarming amount of goat. The fair sprawls across the fields like a medieval music festival, with tents pitched every which way and people shouting about turnips with suspicious enthusiasm. You blend in quickly, because that's the beauty of a fair. It's one of the few medieval places where everyone is suspect. No one asks your name. No one cares if your tunic's stolen or your beard's full of hay. For a few hours, you're just another body in the crowd. And for a moment, you feel invisible in the best way. But of course, nothing in medieval life is ever just fun. Fairs, especially the big ones, aren't just gatherings of buyers and sellers. They're also hotbeds of crime, both petty and wildly creative. The authorities know this, and they don't like it. Enter the justices of the peace. These are the kingdom's answer to local mischief, and they've been given wide-ranging powers to investigate, detain, fine, and very occasionally try to understand what's going on. Usually, though, they just show up, write down names, confiscate fake weights, and scowl at anyone loitering near the cider barrel. At this fair, the justice on duty is a round man with a feather in his hat and a book he clearly hasn't read. He's flanked by 2 men with cudgels and matching sneers. They're here not to protect you, but to remind you that even fun has rules. You drift past a man selling boiled eels, past a boy offering authentic dragon teeth you suspect sheep, past a woman selling apples from a basket you're 70% sure was yours last week. And that's when you spot it. The gallows. Set up off to the side, half hidden behind a flag bunting and a turnip cart, it's not the center of attention, but it's there, tall and grim and entirely functional. Because here's the truth, medieval fairs were not just parties, they were also venues for justice. Traveling judges would sometimes hold quick trials right at the fair, dispensing sentence before the meat cooled. The logic was simple. Lots of people means lots of witnesses. What better time to show what happens when someone breaks the law? Sometimes they hanged coin forgers, sometimes cattle thieves, occasionally someone who just annoyed the sheriff. And sometimes they hung the wrong person. You inch away from the gallows, back into the crowd, back into safety or the illusion of it. As you duck behind a tent selling questionable pastries, a man bumps into you. "Watch it," he mutters, and you notice his hand just leaving your belt pouch. You spin, grab his wrist, and he grins, "Quick hands, EH?" You should be angry, but really you're just impressed. Because now you've stumbled into another layer of this world, the criminal economy. This isn't just survival, it's organized. There are pickpocket crews, traveling swindlers, counterfeiters, and entire families who specialize in market fraud. They know the town layouts, the festival schedules, the blind spots in every Reeves patrol. And some of them, whispers say, are protected. Protected by corrupt Reeves, who collect a cut of earnings in exchange for looking the other way. Protected by noble households, who find it useful to have someone handle their dirty work. Even protected by clergy, who offer sanctuary with a wink and a side deal. You spend the next hour listening. Not talking, just listening. Two men discuss the best routes for moving stolen cloth. A woman explains how to disguise forged coinage using vinegar and prayer. Someone else claims they can bribe their way out of nearly anything if the coin's good and the timing better. Historians still argue whether this level of organization qualifies as a medieval mafia. But what's certain is that crime in medieval England wasn't always desperate, it was entrepreneurial. And for the first time, you wonder, if the system is stacked against you, why not work outside it? You steal a meat pie smoothly, effortlessly. No one notices. It tastes like freedom and undercooked lamb. But as the sun dips behind the trees and the fare starts to pack down, the familiar chill creeps back in. You're not safe. Because at any moment, someone could recognize you. Not from the theft, not from the pie, but from the pillory, from the stocks, from that plaque that said, "Thief of Bread." And medieval memory is long. So you walk again. Away from the fair, past the gallows, into the trees. You're not sure where you're going, but you know this. You can't stay in one place. Not if you want to survive the legal logic of a world where everyone is guilty, and justice is whoever shouts loudest. You wake to birdsong, though it's less a chorus and more of a noisy argument between magpies. Above you, the tree canopy filters morning light in fragmented patches, as though nature itself is unsure whether it wants you to feel hope or dread. Your neck is stiff, your knees ache, and your bed, yet another patch of questionable ground, has gifted you a pine cone in the ribs. But you're alive. You're free. And that's something. Or at least it feels like something, until you remember what day it is, court day in the next parish over. And you're heading straight toward it. You didn't mean to. In fact, you've done your best to avoid anything shaped like a courthouse, garrison, or moral authority. But hunger, like bad weather and royal taxes, has a way of pushing people toward risk. So you approach the village slowly, carefully, blending in with the traveling cobblers, rag sellers, and onion pushers. Your tunic is still disreputable, your face still vaguely pillory famous. But this town is just far enough from your bread incident that no one gasps or throws radishes at first sight. The village green is already crowded. Not for a market, not for a festival, but for the court leet. Let's pause here. Because you are about to witness one of the most baffling and sleep-deprived events in all of medieval governance. The local court system, also known as folk justice with a smidge of Latin. The court leet was a kind of local tribunal, held regularly in market towns and manors across England. Presided over by a steward or bailiff, these courts handled everything from property disputes and broken hedges to minor thefts, assaults, and offenses against the ale. Yes, the assize of ale is real. The court's first business of the day, tasting the ale. Publicly. You watch with a blend of horror and fascination as a man, appointed specifically for this, sips from several mugs, nodding or grimacing as appropriate. One particularly bad brew gets a theatrical cough and is declared unfit for Christian stomachs. The brewer, a red-faced widow, is fined a penny and told to try again with fewer frogs. Welcome to medieval civic regulation, where everything from your fence height to your bread's density is monitored by your neighbors and judged with all the objectivity of a gossip circle. As the session continues, the court hears cases like a man accused of letting his pigs roam into the churchyard, a woman fined for abusing the reeve verbally, a butcher cited for selling meat from an overly melancholy cow. The atmosphere is part trial, part theater. The audience laughs, gasps, murmurs approvingly, and you realize this is their entertainment. Justice is public, not just because it needs witnesses, but because it's fun. Then, the serious cases begin. A man is accused of theft, not unlike your own crime, and brought before the steward. He protests loudly, insists it was a misunderstanding, that the goose walked into his satchel of its own volition. The steward listens, then consults the 12 men of the jury, drawn from the village, none of whom look thrilled to be there. They whisper, point. One sneezes and seems to vote guilty by accident. The verdict, guilty. The sentence, branding. You feel your stomach twist. They bring out the iron, glowing red from a bed of coals, and press it against the man's palm. He screams, the crowd flinches, but no one moves. It's not a punishment. It's a reminder. Because in medieval England, branding was used not just to hurt, but to mark. One letter, T for thief, F for felon, B for blasphemer, could follow you forever. No need for paperwork. Your skin becomes the record. You quietly edge backward through the crowd. You are not staying here. But before you can leave, a hand grabs your shoulder. It's a constable, not a full-time officer, but a local man with just enough authority and a deeply suspicious frown. He eyes you. Where from, he asks. You say something vague about traveling north. He squints harder. Got your frank pledge? You blink. You're what now? Let's talk about frank pledge, one of medieval England's stranger social systems. Every male over 12 was supposed to belong to a tithing, a group of 10 or so men who pledged to vouch for each other's behavior. If one of them committed a crime, everyone in the tithing could be held responsible, fined, or punished. Think of it as the worst group project in history. Frank pledge was meant to keep people in line via peer pressure and mutual accountability. But for wanderers like you, who belong to no tithing, it meant suspicion by default. The constable frowns. You try to deflect. Say you're just passing through, looking for work, maybe a cartwright, maybe a shepherd, whatever sounds plausible. He eyes your boots, your hands, your probably guilty-looking posture. Finally, he lets go. But not before saying, I'll remember your face. Great, another one. You slip out of the village before sunset. Back to the road. Back to the life between places. And as the stars blink awake overhead, you think about the court, about ale tasters and branded thieves, and the terrifying efficiency of local memory. Justice in this world isn't just about right or wrong. It's about being known. And when you're known for the wrong thing even just once, it sticks harder than hot iron. The sky is a deepening bruise above you, indigo bleeding into rust as you trudge down a muddy road lined with ancient hedgerows and very opinionated crows. You've just escaped another brush with the law, or at least a version of it, and your legs have moved beyond exhaustion into a kind of numb commitment. They no longer ask questions, they just go. You pass a shrine by the roadside, a small wooden box nailed to a pole with a crude carving of a saint and a few limp flowers inside. A prayer for travelers, maybe, or for the guilty. In this world, those categories blur easily. Your stomach growls. Again, it has the audacity to be dramatic about it. You haven't eaten since the meat pie you technically didn't pay for at the fair. You're tired of scrounging, of walking, of sleeping under leaves, but most of all, you're tired of being watched. Because that's the thing about medieval England. There is no such thing as privacy. And in no place is that more obvious than in the church. You reach a monastic outpost just as the bell for Vespers rings, a slow, steady toll that seems to vibrate in your teeth. The buildings are simple, a stone chapel, a timber dormitory, and a low wall meant more to mark space than to keep anyone out. You hesitate. Monks are peculiar. Some are kind, some are suspicious, Some will feed you and pray for your soul. Others will quietly report you to the nearest reeve the moment you turn your back. Still, you're cold, you're hungry, and maybe, just maybe, this is a chance. You walk in with your best impression of humble piety. A young monk, pale and soft-spoken, greets you. His Latin is far better than yours, but you nod reverently and mumble something about seeking shelter. He leads you into a side room where a weak fire smolders and a bowl of thin lentil soup waits like a miracle. You eat, you sleep on straw, you breathe deeply for the first time in days. And in the morning, you learn something strange. The monks are discussing benefit of clergy. You perk up, not because you understand it, but because you recognize desperation when you hear it. Let's unravel this. In medieval law, benefit of clergy was a legal loophole so big you could fit half a prison inside it. Originally, it allowed members of the clergy to be tried in church courts instead of royal courts. Church courts were famously softer. They didn't execute. They often let you off with penance, exile, or extra prayers. Sounds amazing, right? Over time, people started exploiting the rule. How did you prove you were clergy? By reading a passage of the Bible, usually Psalm chapter 51, "Have mercy upon me, O God." If you could read Latin aloud convincingly, you might escape the gallows. This passage became known as the neck verse, because quite literally, it could save your neck. Here's the twist: you don't even have to be clergy, you just have to fake it well. Naturally, the illiterate suffered, the poor, the women, the unlucky. But you've heard enough Latin mumbled at masses, you've picked up scraps from whispered prayers, half-chanted hymns, and the occasional drunken monk at a festival. You might be able to fake it. You ask the young monk, casually, hypothetically. He looks at you and smiles, a little too knowingly. You'd need to pass as clergy, he says, which means you'd need the look, the speech, the bearing. You raise your eyebrows. He shrugs, not impossible. You spend the next 3 days helping with chores, sweeping, scrubbing, carrying firewood, and listening. Every whispered prayer, every psalm, you mimic the hand movements, the posture, the tone. At night, the monk helps you rehearse the verse. He never asks what you've done, and you never tell him. Because in this place, knowledge is currency, and mercy is best earned quietly. Historians still argue whether this loophole was ever meant to be exploited so broadly. Some say it undermined the legal system. Others claim it offered a sliver of fairness in a brutal world. What's certain is this: benefit of clergy became one of the only tools the powerless could sometimes wield. Of course, not everyone agreed. Many judges began to restrict the privilege, branding the hands of first-time offenders, so they couldn't claim the benefit again. Some demanded real proof of ordination. A few simply refused to recognize it at all, especially in the face of serious crimes. You practice anyway, because someday soon, probably, you'll be caught again. And when they ask if you have any last words, you want them to sound Latin. But the monk warns you. If you stumble, if you mispronounce even a word, he doesn't finish the sentence. You nod. Message received. You leave the monastery at dawn, pockets light, mind heavy, but with a verse in your mouth and the faintest chance of surviving this strange, sideways world. A world where faith and fraud blend so easily, even the saints would blink. The road out of the monastery curves along a ridge, giving you a rare, elevated view of the countryside. Rolling fields, stone cottages, and distant smoke curling from chimneys like soft gray question marks. You breathe deeply, letting the morning air clear your head, or try to. There's something about this landscape that feels eternal, unmoved by your brief career as a criminal fugitive. But serenity doesn't last long in medieval England, especially not for you. You reach a crossroads marked by a weather-worn signpost and an even more weather-worn corpse hanging from a gibbet. The body is just bones now, creaking slightly in the breeze, but the message is fresh as ever. This could be you. You look away quickly. Your next destination isn't a choice so much as a compromise between survival and familiarity. A market town with a small monastery, a faded tavern, and, if rumor holds, a church offering sanctuary. Because if you get caught again, this time you'll need more than a neck verse. You'll need a holy place, preferably one with thick walls, and a priest who owes nobody anything. Let's talk about sanctuary. In medieval England, churches had a sacred power. If you were fleeing arrest, punishment, or mob justice, and you managed to physically touch the altar or church door, you were, at least temporarily, safe. It didn't make you innocent. It didn't make your crime vanish, but it did pause the system, forcing your accusers to seek justice more slowly, more legally, and sometimes more inconveniently than they wanted. There were rules, of course. First, you had to confess your crime aloud in public, ideally to the priest. Then, you were allowed to stay in sanctuary for 40 days. 40 days. Inside the church, unable to leave, eating only what others brought, sleeping beside stone columns, bathing, if at all, in holy water. And at the end of those 40 days, you had two choices: stand trial and hope the judge was feeling merciful, or abjure the realm. That's right. You could literally swear an oath to leave England forever, on foot, via a port assigned by the authorities, walking the whole way in full view of the townsfolk like a one-man funeral procession. You had to carry a wooden cross. You had to stick to the route, and if you strayed, lingered, or stopped to chat with anyone, the protection ended. You were fair game again. In practice, this made sanctuary a weird halfway house between salvation and social exile. And today, you are very much considering it. You enter the town under a cloak that smells like sheep and regret. The streets are busy. Women selling herbs, children throwing mud, a man arguing with his donkey. The church looms at the far end of the square, stone, quiet, and mercifully open. But just as you start toward it, a sharp voice cuts through the noise. "Oi, you there!" You freeze. A boy, no older than 10, pointing at you with the accusatory glee only children and unpaid town criers can muster. "I've seen him," he calls, "the bread thief." A few heads turn. One man frowns. A woman clutches her onions protectively. You do the only sensible thing. You run. Past the apothecary, past a co-op of squawking chickens, past a dog that joins the chase entirely out of joy. You bolt up the church steps and slam your hand against the doorframe. No lightning. Good start. Inside, the air is cool, still, and smells like wax and quiet warnings. A priest emerges from the shadows, surprised but not alarmed. He's clearly seen worse. He listens to your breathless confession. He nods. He closes the doors behind you with a solemn thud that sounds alarmingly final. Sanctuary has begun. You sit in a pew and feel your pulse slowly drop from panicked rabbit to nervous badger. You are safe. Sort of. Because remember, sanctuary doesn't solve anything. It simply delays the inevitable. And soon enough, the reeve arrives. He's not angry, just bored. He's seen this before. He asks the priest for confirmation, then marks your name in a ledger. That's right, you're on file now. Over the next few days, townspeople visit. Some offer food. Others come to gawk. One woman brings a turnip and tells you it's poetic justice. But mostly, you're alone. And time, well, it stretches. There's no entertainment in sanctuary. No books, no music, no conversation unless the priest is feeling charitable. You watch spiders, you learn the cracks in the stone, you count your breaths, then lose track and start again. You wonder if 40 days can change a person. Historians still debate sanctuary's true purpose. Some say it was a holdover from ancient holy spaces. Others think it was a practical compromise, an early form of plea bargaining. In theory, it protected the accused from vengeance. In practice, it also let the authorities avoid messy trials for small crimes. But for you, it's a limbo. And at the end of it, you must choose. Trial or exile. Neither sounds good, both are terrifying. But you have time. Time to rehearse your neck verse, time to reflect, time to plan an escape if it comes to that. The priest brings you stale bread and watery ale. You nod in thanks. He lingers by the door. Some say sanctuary is divine, he murmurs. Others say it's just a delay. You don't answer, because you don't know which you're praying for. Your 40 days are nearly up. The church has grown smaller in your mind, though its walls haven't moved. It's just that you know every stone now, every flicker of the votive candles, every morning groan of the timber roof, and the sighs of bored saints in stained glass. Your body has settled into a strange rhythm, quiet, still, patient, but your mind races. Because the Reeve will return soon, and he will ask the question, will you stand trial, or will you abjure the realm? Neither choice feels like winning, but then medieval justice was never about winning, it was about not losing worse. So while you wait, you think. You remember your first punishment, humiliating, public, messy, and you imagine it again, multiplied tenfold, if a judge decides this time you've wasted the court's time, branding, whipping, possibly hanging, maybe a third round of rotten turnips. Abjuring the realm, by contrast, is dramatic, but survivable. The process is strict. You must confess your crimes again, this time before a royal official. You must take an oath of exile, renounce your claim to English protection, acknowledge the king's mercy, and promise to leave the country forever. Then you'll be assigned a port city and a route to follow. The port might be a few days away, or weeks, but you must walk there publicly with a cross in hand, wearing a hood, moving town to town like a one-person funeral. Along the way, you must sleep outside, beg for food, and hope no one decides to shortcut justice by taking the law into their own hands. You are now, technically, banished under mercy, which sounds poetic but really means untouchable and unwanted. If you make it to the port, you must take the first ship available. Doesn't matter where it's going. France, Flanders, Norway. If there's a boat, you're on it. If there is no boat, you wait, in the cold, on the dock, with the gulls and your thoughts. The monks have explained all this. They even know of a man who was sent to Bristol, but the boat captain refused him. So he slept by the docks for 3 weeks and eventually stole a skiff. He was found, soaked and freezing, in Cornwall. They hanged him upside down, then right side up, then properly. You try not to think about that. The priest who first took you in enters the sanctuary one morning with a face like bad weather. He clears his throat. They've come. The Reeve, the sheriff's man, and a clerk with a fur-trimmed hood that screams, "I'm literate and smug about it." They ask you gently but not kindly, your choice. And you say the words slowly, formally, carefully. I abjure the realm. They nod. They write. They give you a route 25 miles on foot to Southampton by way of 4 named towns. You must travel a mile each day, no more. You must sleep on the road. You must carry a cross. They give you a scrap of wood, shaped crudely, your new companion. And with that, they open the church doors. The townsfolk watch as you step out, blinking into the cold, gripping the cross like it might argue. The first town is 2 miles away. You're already behind. But the rule says no more than 1 mile per day, not at least. So you sit by the road for a while, pretending to obey. A group of boys pass by and snicker. One throws a clod of dirt at you. Another calls you the Holy Thief. You wonder if that nickname will follow you to France. If you get to France. Because here's the thing, the journey itself is a punishment. You are unarmed, unfed, technically unclean since you've not had a proper bath in over a month. Your only protection is the cross, which has the magical power to confuse people just long enough for you to walk past them. Some travelers avert their eyes, others ask questions, a few offer bread, one man insists on blessing you, then pockets your apple. At night you curl under trees, rain comes, soaking everything. You whisper the psalm you practiced just in case someone demands it, Miserere me Deus. Along the road, you meet others. A girl who abjured for setting fire to her stepfather's barn. An old man who claims he didn't do anything, but liked the idea of leaving. A mother carrying her child, abjuring together for stealing from a shrine. You travel loosely together for a while, then split, each heading to their own assigned port. It's a slow exodus of the unwanted, a river of softly damned pilgrims. Some never make it. One young man, exhausted, tries to cut across a shortcut to speed things up. He's seen and caught. The reeve decides that breaking the oath voids the mercy, the punishment, back to town, no more sanctuary, no more choices. The next time you pass that village, he's in the stocks. You grip your cross tighter. Eventually, after 12 days of slow progress and wet shoes, you reach Southampton. The port smells of salt and stale fish. Ships creak in the water. You find the sheriff's man and show your scrap of wood. He nods, disinterested, points to a small coastal vessel bound for somewhere in Brittany. No one says goodbye. You step aboard with your cross. You sit beside crates of dried herring and a man who claims to be a goat merchant, though he has no goats. As the boat pulls away, you look back. England shrinks, the coast blurs. And with it everything you've known. Law and injustice, bread and pillories, monks and neck verses. You are no longer part of that kingdom. You are outlawed under grace, a contradiction made flesh. And yet somehow you feel lighter. Not free, not yet. But elsewhere. And for now, that's enough. The sea is not as majestic as you imagined. It's not even that blue. Mostly it's gray, heaving, cold, and remarkably full of unpleasant smells. You spend most of the voyage leaning over the side of the boat, questioning your decisions and your stomach's resilience. The goat merchant, if that's what he really is, tries to cheer you up with stories of amphibious sheep. They do not help. Still, you're moving. Each creak of the hull takes you farther from English justice, if that's even the right word for what you've just escaped. You clutch your now splintered wooden cross like a relic, though the ship's first mate keeps trying to use it to prop open a barrel lid. Eventually, the coast of Brittany appears. It's greener than you expected, with tall cliffs and wind-bent trees. The port is modest, a few stone buildings, a tavern, some fishing boats, and a line of suspicious French customs officers who eye you like you've already done something wrong. They let you off with barely a question. England's problem is now not their problem. You step onto foreign soil with no money, no friends, and no legal identity. Congratulations, you are now a stateless medieval wanderer. But you're not alone. The port, it turns out, is full of people like you. Exiles, outlaws, banned and banished from a dozen realms, men with accents from Flanders, Gascony, the Rhineland, some of whom haven't spoken to family in years. They live in the margins of towns and taverns, forming loose alliances, sharing food, lies, and news from across the channel. And some have found a new profession. Mercenaries. Because here's the secret. In 14th century Europe, war is always happening somewhere. Kings feud, lords quarrel, cities rebel, and armies, professional or not, need bodies, strong ones, desperate ones. Like you. Within days of arrival, a man in a dented breastplate and fur-lined boots offers you a job. He calls himself Captain Vian. Though everyone seems to pronounce it with air quotes, his pitch is simple. You eat, you fight, maybe you die, but you die with boots on and coin in your hand. It's better than starving, maybe. You join. And suddenly, your criminal record doesn't matter. In the world of free companies, bands of freelance soldiers for hire, no one cares what you stole, what you confessed, or what wooden symbol you once carried. They care whether you can walk in mud without falling, swing a cudgel without whining, and shout convincingly in battle. You train. You march. You learn how to wear armor without tipping over, how to tie a proper bandage, and how to keep wine from freezing inside your boot. Historians still argue whether these free companies were heroic or hellish. Some say they protected villages. Others say they ransacked them for breakfast. Most agree they were a bit of both, soldiers by day, looters by night, survivalists always. You learn to survive, too. And you learn that the world outside England has its own peculiar laws. In Brittany, the dukes are the law, and they change their minds often. In Flanders, city councils have more power than some kings. In parts of France, you can be fined for sneezing at the wrong feast, though this may be an exaggeration or not. But what's consistent everywhere? Your past doesn't follow you. No one asks about the bread. No one knows about the stocks. No one whispers about neck verses or the brand that never happened. You are, for the first time in a long time, just you. And then, because life is rarely linear, you find yourself guarding a monastery. That's right. Months after fleeing an English church as a desperate fugitive, you're now protecting one in a foreign land. The monks here speak a strange dialect, but they pay in bread and cheese, and they don't ask questions. One night, you sit beside the gates and talk with another mercenary. His name's Jakob. He's missing 3 fingers and claims to have been a tailor once. He tells you this. Law is just what the man with the sword says it is. You ask, what about justice? He laughs. That's what the man with the bigger sword says. You nod, not because you agree, but because you understand. And then he adds, almost kindly, but mercy, that's what the tired ones say, when they've seen too much to care. You sit in silence. The stars are bright that night, brighter than you've seen them since your first escape, and for the first time in months, you sleep deeply, without fear of waking up in chains or with turnips in your hair. Because even if the law forgets, even if history forgets, you remember. You remember the cold of the stocks, the church's stillness, the cross's weight, and you remember the taste of stolen bread, now long gone. It doesn't define you, but it's part of you. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The war ends. Just like that, with a scroll, a seal, a handshake between 2 men far away who've never once set foot in the muddy camp where you sleep. Peace comes not with trumpets but with orders, and now Captain Vian, quotation marks, still implied, dismisses the company with a shrug and a bag of underpaid coin. You are once again jobless, and in a foreign land. But you're different now, hardened, not just by travel or weather or undercooked lentils, but by something less visible, the weight of having lived outside the law, and then outside the system entirely. Your hair is longer, your scars have stories, and your sense of what counts as normal has been permanently redefined. So you drift. Through villages where no one speaks your language, through markets where your accent buys you suspicion. You sell your boots, then your belt, then the little knife you carried since England. Eventually, You land in Rouen, a bustling port city caught between English and French hands during the 100 Years' War. It's a place where allegiances shift like weather, where identity is a fluid thing paper thin and constantly negotiated. And here you see something familiar. A man being pilloried in the town square. Different country, same setup, a wooden board, a jeering crowd, a sign hung around his neck, this time in French. You squint. Your reading is better now. It says voleur de poisson. Fish thief. You feel something twist in your chest. You ask someone in the crowd what he did. They shrug. Stole herring. Then, as if that explains everything, they toss a cabbage at his knees. You step away, stomach churning. Not from sympathy, well, not entirely, but from memory. That was you once, or close enough, and it could be again so easily. You decide to leave Rouen. This time not as an exile, or a runaway, or a branded man, but as something else entirely, an untraceable person, not free exactly, but uncategorized. You hear rumors of a ship bound for England, quiet, unregistered, and crewed by men who don't ask questions. You hesitate. England, that word still makes your pulse jump. But it's been over a year now, maybe 2. Time bends when you live by daylight and instinct. You wonder if they remember you, if the Reeves in that village still look for the bread thief, if someone else got pilloried next and took your place in the town's collective scorn. Still, going back is madness. But you are, if nothing else, chronically curious. The ship takes you for half pay and a promise to swab decks. You do, badly, but they're used to worse. The voyage is short and damp and features one unexplainable fight over a stolen onion. You land at Dover, cloaked in fog and accents. Nobody stops you. Nobody questions you. The port official barely glances at you as you walk down the gangplank. England, it seems, has bigger things to worry about like war, taxes, and plague. Yes, plague. The whispers start before you even leave the docks. A village up north, a monastery sealed shut, a town where the graveyard is now the town. The Black Death hasn't fully returned, but the fear of it never left. And fear, it makes people cautious, distracted, easier to slip past. You travel inland, slowly, picking up odd jobs, saying little, watching 100 tiny signs that say England is not the same place you left. The Reeve in one town is now a woman, bold, sharp-eyed, respected. You've never seen that before. A merchant near Oxford hires travelers without question, says he prefers the ones who've known hunger. You stay in a town where the stocks are broken, the pillory rotted. The old punishments are fading, not because of mercy, but because too many hands are needed in the fields. Crime is overlooked in favor of labor. And then, in a market one day, you hear it. Someone's telling a story about a thief who stole a loaf of bread. Not you, they say. No, it was a boy, or a woman, or a one-legged sailor, depending on the version. They say he ran through the fish market, got caught, got stuck in the stocks with a sign around his neck. The story gets a laugh. You freeze. The tale has changed, shifted, grown a beard and a joke, and lost its names. You're not in it anymore. You're not remembered. And for the first time in a long, long while, that feels wonderful. Because in medieval England, to be forgotten is the closest most people get to freedom. You walk on. Maybe to the north, maybe to a monastery, maybe just to the next warm fire. You carry no papers. You speak little. You steal nothing. And when you sleep, you dream not of the stocks, or the bread, or the court, but of quiet. Because after all you've seen, all you've done, all you've survived, the quiet is the only thing that feels like justice. You're digging. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. Your hands are wrapped in rags, your knees deep in mud, and you're learning just how stubborn English clay can be when it decides it doesn't like you. The man supervising you has a whistle made from a bird's skull and a voice like wet gravel. He's not cruel, just immune to your suffering. You're helping build a ditch around a new sheepfold. It's part of a labor contract, though no one explained what that meant when you were handed a shovel and pointed toward the horizon. But you're not complaining, because you've stumbled upon one of the few things that criminals in medieval England could do to rebuild their lives: labor service. After years of flux, fleeing, abjuring, marching, returning, you've re-entered the fringes of legitimacy, that invisible zone where nobody likes you, but everyone needs you. The land is short of hands, the plague took too many, and desperate bodies with strong backs are now suddenly assets. The landowner here doesn't ask where you came from. He asks how well you can swing a pickaxe. So you dig, and in exchange you get a crust of bread, a place in the barn to sleep, one ladle of thick, questionable stew at dusk, and perhaps most importantly, no questions. That's as close to rehabilitation as you'll ever get. Let's pause to consider the options that faced a medieval criminal trying to go straight. Spoiler, they weren't great. There were no prisons in the modern sense, no long-term rehabilitation centers, no parole officers or social workers. If you survived your sentence, whether branding, stocks, or exile, your future depended almost entirely on your class, your village's memory, your usefulness. For most, that meant trying to disappear into laboring classes as ditch diggers, swineherds, reapers, coal bearers, or manure scoopers. Yes, that was a real job, and someone had to do it. Some ex-criminals turned religious, not because of sudden revelation, but because monasteries needed workers. If you could scrub floors and keep quiet, you might earn a cot and 2 meals a day. Celibacy and early mornings were the only real costs. Others fled into outlaw bands, less Robin Hood and more 3 guys with sticks robbing carts. You're trying the honest path, or the least dishonest one. The man in charge here is named Osric. His hands are as big as bread loaves and twice as tough. He speaks only when necessary, eats with alarming efficiency, and occasionally mutters prayers when the stew looks suspicious. After 2 weeks, he trusts you enough to let you fix fence posts unsupervised. You start hearing whispers from the others. That one's not local. Don't know where he came from. He digs well, though. Reputation, it seems, still travels, just more slowly now. One night a girl named Tib sits beside you by the fire. She's missing 2 teeth and talks like a windmill. She asks, "You ever get caught?" You blink, then nod. She nods back, satisfied. "I got flogged once," she says, "for yelling at a reeve. He fell in a ditch after. Divine punishment that." You smile. And that's the moment it clicks. Everyone here has a story. Maybe not all criminal, but all marked by loss, mistake, circumstance, or sheer bad luck. This isn't just a labor crew. It's a fellowship of the slightly broken. You start listening more. You learn that Osric once led a company of archers, that Tib's brother vanished during the plague, and she's been looking for him in every town since, that the cook was once a tax collector until someone lit his office on fire. He says it was a clerical misunderstanding. You begin to feel something strange. Stability. Not peace, not happiness, but a rhythm that feels almost livable. And then, because the universe likes its symmetry, a reeve arrives. He's come to check the tax rolls, count the workers, sniff around for anyone unregistered. Your heart does a small pirouette. You haven't given your real name in weeks, maybe months. You're technically a returned exile, possibly still wanted, depending on whether that old scribe in Kent retired. You consider fleeing, again. But this time you don't, because you've changed. And so has the world. The reeve doesn't recognize you. He sees a laborer, tired, dirty, forgettable. He checks a box on his parchment, mutters about short harvests, and rides away. And you stay. No one claps, no one hugs you, but that night the cook gives you a second ladle of stew, and Osric lets you use the dry hay. It's the closest thing to forgiveness you've ever received. And as you lie there, listening to the snores of your accidental family, you realize something. You're not just surviving anymore. You're rejoining. Slowly, grubbily, unevenly. But really. And in medieval England, where most people die without ever being known outside their parish, that's more than enough. You've worked through the harvest season. Your hands are no longer hands. They are tools, calloused, chipped, efficient. Your back has bent into a shape that permanently suggests you're either mid-bow or preparing to lift something heavy. The fields have become familiar, their slopes, their moods, their grudges. But more than that, the village has started to accept you. They don't invite you to feast days, not yet, but they nod when you pass. Children no longer point. The dogs have stopped barking, most of them anyway. And when the new tax list is posted outside the church, someone scribbled a name next to yours. It's not your name exactly, but it's close enough. Welcome to the world of informal reintegration, medieval style. You're not officially forgiven. There's no parchment absolving you of past crimes, but you're not being chased anymore either, because in this world, usefulness equals belonging, and you, it seems, are now useful. Still, you're not fully at ease. Not when the law might still remember you. Because as much as your neighbors have started to forget, the records haven't. You hear it one afternoon while collecting firewood near the forest edge. Two men talking about a new tax inquisition. The Crown is sending officials, not local reeves, but royal auditors, to assess land, laborers, and the accuracy of village ledgers. Which means they'll be reading names. And even if your new name is written, your old one might be hiding somewhere else, on an indictment roll, a court calendar, a clerk's forgotten parchment. All it takes is one curious man with clean shoes and good Latin, and your entire past floods back like bad weather. You walk home slower that evening. At supper, you say nothing. But you start packing quietly, methodically, because you know what needs to happen. It's time to disappear again. Not because you've done something new, but because the system has finally caught up to your old self. The next morning, you're gone before dawn. No note, no goodbye. Just a slightly cleaner pile of hay and a ladle returned to the kitchen bench. You take the North Road. Not because it's safer, but because you've never taken it before. That's the new logic. Avoid the familiar. Stay moving. Become a story no one can finish. The path cuts through woods where the trees lean in too closely, as if trying to hear your secrets. You sleep under nettle shelters, drink from streams, and eat whatever roots Tib once taught you to recognize. But on the fourth day, you arrive at a place you didn't expect to find, a widow's farm. It's small, poor. A cart is half collapsed in the weeds and the roof sags like a sad hat, but smoke curls from the chimney and you hear singing bad but cheerful. You knock slowly twice. A woman answers. She's older than you but strong, eyes like river pebbles, round, cool, quietly amused. You ask if she needs help. She eyes you. Then she says, "You dig." You nod. And just like that, you're hired. You sleep in the hayloft again. You rebuild her cart. You repair a stone fence that hasn't stood straight since Henry II. In return, she feeds you whatever her goats allow her to milk, and tells you wild stories that may or may not be dreams she once had. One night she points at your hands. You've worked long. You nod. She studies you again, not always legally, I'm guessing. You hesitate. Then nod again. She doesn't flinch, just says, "Don't matter here. Only thing that matters is you don't lie to the goats. They're very judgmental." You both laugh. And in that moment something cracks. Not in a bad way. Not like the stocks or the pillory or the moment your hand first touched sanctuary stone. No, this is quieter, a crack that lets light in. Because you've told the truth, however briefly. And you were not punished. Let's pause for a moment and reflect. Medieval England was not a place of rehabilitation, not in any formal sense. You didn't serve your time and return to society with a clean slate. You were either forgotten, or you were lucky enough to find someone who chose to ignore your past. In some cases, it was family. In others, a monastery. In the rarest of all, it was a stranger. You stay with the widow for months. You help her plant turnips, scare off foxes, fix her chimney, and mend a small hole in her roof that always leaks exactly when it's least convenient. And no one comes looking for you. Not because the law stopped, but because the law, like all things, has moved on. A new generation of bread thieves now fills the records. A new Reeve writes in his own ink, and somewhere, in some damp archive, your name curls softly in faded Latin, unread, unneeded, unimportant. One morning, you wake up early and sit outside. The widow hands you tea made from nettles and bad decisions. She sits beside you, doesn't ask where you're going. Because she can tell. And you are. Not because you're afraid anymore, but because you can. You've been outside the law. You've lived under it. And now, finally, you've outlasted it. The road is soft beneath your boots, mud from last night's rain, broken occasionally by roots and the faintest ghosts of cartwheel tracks. The widow watched you leave without a word, not coldly, not warmly, just as someone who knows better than to hold on to things that were never hers to keep. You walk west. Not for any particular reason. It just feels less traveled. The wind comes from the sea. You like the sound of it. By noon you reach a hamlet, small, quiet, fewer people than goats, and the goats seem, if anything, better fed. You're about to walk past it when something catches your eye. A group of men and women gathered around a long table in the green. On it lie scraps of fabric, bundles of herbs, pewter buttons, a goose feather fan, and a pile of tattered tunics with curious stitching. A fair? No. A tailor. You move closer. Turns out it's St. Anne's Day, which in this village is celebrated with the ritual of mending. People bring old clothes, broken tools, worn-out gear. The village tailors and smiths work all day to patch, fix, and re-dye what they can. It's a tradition less about celebration and more about resilience, an annual public act of saying, we're not rich, but we're not giving up either. You hand over your tunic. The woman behind the table frowns at it. This looks like it's seen a dozen lives. You shrug, 3, maybe 4. She grins. She doesn't ask your name. She doesn't ask your trade. She just starts stitching. And for the next few hours, you're nobody again. A face in the village, a body in need of warmth, no questions, no judgments. The ritual of mending, you learn later, isn't just about clothes. It's symbolic, a way of acknowledging that life tears things, and people, and we choose whether to throw them out or sew them back together. Medieval England didn't have therapy. It had traditions like this. After the sewing is done, the food begins. It's simple barley pottage, cheese, apples, but abundant, and no one keeps track of who brought what. It's understood, if you eat, you owe. That night, the village lights lanterns and sings. You sit by the fire. Someone hands you a jug of ale. You sip. You listen. And you notice something odd. There's no punishment in the air. No gossips whispering about old crimes. No Reeves checking rolls. Just people singing, living. And in this moment you realize some places stopped caring about the law. Not because they rebelled, but because they had more important things to do. Let's rewind a bit. By the 15th century, many small English communities began practicing a kind of quiet noncompliance. The king's laws existed, yes, but so did local priorities, harvests, marriages, surviving winter. Many villages learned to selectively remember what crimes mattered. Stole a horse, bad. Stole because your children were hungry, less bad. Got branded, still useful in the fields. Let's just say it was an accident with a fire poker. This wasn't leniency, it was pragmatism. And you, now, are a perfect fit for pragmatism. Over the next few days, you work in the village, mucking pens, carrying sacks, fixing a fence for a man who can't bend his back anymore. Someone offers you a room. Another offers you a name, Thomas. It's not yours, but it'll do. You attend church on Sunday, even if the priest dozes through half his sermon. You nod at children. You get better at dodging goats. And you notice something. You've stopped hiding. Not because you're brave, but because nobody's chasing you. And one night, staring at the stars from a hill outside the village, it hits you. You have become the life you ran toward. Not a new man. Not a forgiven one. But a man stitched together from scraps, patched and frayed and quietly functional. And in this world, that's more than most can claim. You lie back. The wind shifts. Your patched tunic holds in the warmth. And you fall asleep knowing you'll wake tomorrow, not as a criminal, but as a worker, a helper. A ghost, slowly learning how to be solid again. You're repairing a roof when they come. Two riders, cloaked and stern, clatter into the village without warning. The hooves of their horses churn up mud and murmurs alike. Children stop playing. A dog begins barking and forgets how to stop. They wear the wrong kind of clean. Their boots are polished, their coats unfrayed, their scrolls dry and tightly rolled in leather cases. You can smell bureaucracy on them before they dismount. Royal agents, someone whispers. And your stomach folds in on itself. You're not on any list. You don't even have a surname here. But you have been branded once by memory, if not by iron. You know how these visits go. Someone's land is measured, someone's debt is recalculated, and someone always disappears quietly, escorted off under the illusion of fairness. You watch from the roof, hammer in hand, trying to look like a man who has always belonged here. You consider hiding, running, pretending to be a chimney sweep who doesn't speak English. But it's already too late. One of them is speaking with the priest, the other is reading names. And then silence. He looks up, points, straight at you. You freeze. Let's take a breath. This is not the arrest. Not yet. This is the inquiry. And in medieval England, an inquiry is both more civilized and more dangerous than being outright accused. Because it means you have a chance to lie convincingly. And if you fail, well, then they simply tighten the definitions of justice to include you. You climb down from the roof, slowly, calmly, as if you've done nothing wrong, because technically you haven't, not in this village, not in this name. The man with the scroll says your name. Not your name, the one they wrote for you here. Thomas of Lichfield? You nod, heart pounding. He frowns. Where were you during the harvest of 1352? You blink. Which harvest? Good answer. Confusion buys time. He narrows his eyes. We're reviewing tax records. There are inconsistencies, movements, men who disappeared from one shire only to reappear in another under curious circumstances. You shrug. I've always been here. The priest coughs but says nothing. Your heart aches with gratitude and fear. The agent frowns again, says something about confirming with the reeve, then mounts his horse. The other follows. They leave. Just like that. You don't sleep that night. Not because you're afraid they'll come back, but because you realize how close you came to being erased again. It wouldn't have been execution, likely not even stocks, more likely transportation, forced labor in another town, or reassignment under someone's noble household. You would have vanished from this place as suddenly as you arrived. No more goats, no more nettle tea, no more stitched-up tunic hanging by the hearth. And nobody here would have fought it. Because that's the truth of the age. Justice is not a principle, it's a tide. It rises, it falls, sometimes it drags you out even when you're no longer drowning. The next day, you visit the priest. You thank him. He says nothing for a long time, then pours tea, sits across from you, studies your hands. You weren't always Thomas, were you? You shake your head. He nods. Did you deserve the name before? You think. Then say once, but not anymore. He exhales, not relief, just understanding. I've seen worse, he says, and better, but worse certainly. Weeks pass, the road dries, spring creeps into the hedgerows. You work. You eat. You live. And one day, you see your reflection in a puddle, and you realize you look like everyone else now. Not a criminal. Not a saint. Just a man who might have always been here, had the records not disagreed. And in medieval England, that's as good as a pardon. The priest dies in his sleep. No illness, no drama, just a soft final breath on a chilly morning, and then he's still. It's a blow. To the village, to the children he told stories to the widow who once helped him patch his robes, and to you. Because he was the only one who knew who you had been, knew what you had done, and, more importantly, chose to forget. His funeral is small but reverent. The whole village attends. You stand near the back, hat in hand, trying not to think about how vulnerable you've become. You say nothing, sing softly, watch as the earth is returned to itself. Later that day, a young man arrives on a thin horse, cloak stained with road salt. He carries a letter of appointment. He is the new priest. He's young, educated, curious. You don't like that last part. Let's pause for a moment and talk about clergy and record-keeping. In theory, a village priest was responsible not just for souls, but for names, baptisms, marriages, deaths, occasional confessions, and who belonged where. Not every priest wrote things down. Not every village had vellum to spare, but many did. And some were very thorough. That's the danger with this new one. He immediately begins organizing the parish books, rewriting rosters, asking questions. Where did this man come from? What happened to the man who used to work the East Field? Who's this Thomas? When did he arrive? Too many questions. Too much Latin. You decide to disappear, again. But before you can act, something stops you. One evening, you find the priest struggling with a cart, the wheels broken, the axle split. You wordlessly kneel beside it, mutter something about oak pegs, and begin repairs. He watches you work. Eventually says, "You know what you're doing." You nod. He pauses, then, "Did you train for it?" You shrug. "A long time ago." Silence again. The sky darkens. And then, curiously, he says, "I don't care, you know." You blink. "About who you were," he continues. "Whatever your name used to be, I've read enough records to know most of them lie, or change, or confuse one Thomas with another. I care more about who feeds the goats. You stare at him. He doesn't look smug. He just looks tired. And somehow, that makes it easier to believe. So you stay. And this time for real. Not as a fugitive. Not as a man dodging justice or mercy or recognition. Just as a man with a job and a patch of dirt and the privilege of being boring. You plant leeks, build a fence, mend the roof again just because. And slowly, you begin to speak in we instead of I. We should trim that hedge. We're low on thatch. We ought to fix the chapel window. And no one corrects you. Because you belong now. Not legally, not on paper, but in practice. Historians often debate what belonging meant in medieval villages. Was it tied to land, bloodline, baptism? Sometimes. But often it was simpler. Belonging was who you showed up for, who helped with harvest, who knew when old Gilda needed her chimney swept, who remembered to tie the gate shut so the pigs didn't get into the barley again. And by that definition, you belong more than most. Years pass. Quietly. The world changes slowly outside your village. New taxes, a small rebellion, a bishop scandal, another war. You hear the rumors. But they never quite touch you. Because you are here. With your goats. Your patched roof. Your name that isn't yours, but has become so through use. One day, a child asks you if it's true you were once a criminal. You laugh. And say, aren't we all at some point? She giggles and runs off. You keep planting. Because in the end, you outlived the punishment. Not by outrunning it, but by becoming someone else quietly, gently, fully. The year you turn 40, probably 40, though you're not entirely sure, a new problem arrives in the form of a scribe. Not a royal officer. Not a reeve. But something arguably worse, an educated volunteer with excellent handwriting and far too much free time. He's come from a nearby priory, assigned, whatever that means, to help the village update its inventories and clarify holdings, words that, in practice, mean rooting through barns, asking deeply nosy questions, and redrawing boundary lines with the unearned confidence of someone holding both ink and authority. At first, you ignore him, but then he starts making lists. And suddenly, your carefully tended identity, your name, your fields, your slow-won trust is being written down. On paper. In permanent, blessed ink. You feel the panic return, that old flutter beneath the ribs, the instinct that says, run before the questions start, before the law finds you through a misplaced margin note. But this time, you don't run. Not right away. You watch. Because something strange happens. The scribe makes mistakes. He mishears names, misspells them, mixes up families, puts two brothers down as cousins, names the same pig twice in a single inventory, and no one corrects him. Because nobody knows how to read. Except him. And now you. A little. You learn slowly, by candlelight, from scraps, from the priest, from years of listening and guessing and finally recognizing that a curved line here and a flourish there meant Thomas, or something close enough. You've never admitted this to anyone, but you can read if you squint. And so you read what the scribe is writing, and you see something stunning. He's given you a surname. Not your real one, not even the one the village gave you, but a completely invented one, Thomas Ditcher, presumably because someone once saw you digging and assumed that was your role, which frankly it was. You stare at the name on the parchment, your name, and realize you've finally become someone else in ink. And the state, through sheer error and paperwork, is agreeing with you. Let's talk about record-keeping in the later medieval period. After the plague, as population shifted and power structures trembled, England tried to reassert control through documents, manorial rolls, hearth tax lists, muster records, all written by hand, all flawed. This was a paper-based surveillance system, but it was still early days. Errors were common, crossed wires frequent, and identity, for anyone not a noble, remained gloriously unstable. For a clever man, this was freedom. You didn't need to lie. You just had to wait for someone else to write the wrong truth. Thomas Ditcher, the scribe, says one day, frowning at his page, "That's you, right?" You nod slowly. He squints. "You weren't on the 1349 roll." You shrug. "Wasn't much of a village then." He nods, distracted. "Right, plague and all that." And that's the end of it. No suspicion, no inquiry. Just a new name added to a new book. And with it, your old self collapses entirely. The next week, the village reeve uses your new name during church announcements. You blink, but don't correct him. The priest says it during the blessing. You don't flinch. A child says, "Ditcher, come see the lambs." You smile. Because somehow, this unearned word, this bureaucratic accident, has become the closest thing you've ever had to absolution. Historians often describe medieval identity as fluid, but it's more than that. It was reactive. Who you were depended not just on bloodline or trade, but on where you stood when someone called your name, who answered, who wrote it down, and whether anyone else remembered differently. And if no one remembered, you won. You carved the name into a beam in your cottage. Ditcher. A joke. A mask. A rebirth. And at long last yours. A letter arrives. An actual letter, sealed in wax, written on parchment, and carried by a man who looks uncomfortable around goats and unimpressed by mud. He delivers it to the priest, who reads it aloud after Sunday Mass with great ceremony and minimal enthusiasm. It's from a noble, a local lord, apparently recently returned from Calais, looking to reassert his holdings and re-engage feudal obligations, which, translated from aristocratic to human, means he wants labor. From the village. Immediately. You hear murmurs ripple through the congregation. Nobody likes this. The villagers thought they were free, or close enough. They've been living quiet, semi-autonomous lives ever since the old lord's lands fell into disrepair and the taxes stopped showing up. Now, suddenly, that quiet is ending. And with it comes something far worse, a press gang. 2 days later, armed men arrive. They're not cruel, just methodical. They have names, lists, orders. They ask who can reap, who can dig, who can thatch, and when they find you strong, silent, unclaimed by any noble household, they assign you. Just like that. Back to servitude. Like a coin returned to circulation after years under a floorboard. You march for 3 days with others. Some are young and scared, others old and resigned. All of you are peasants, tied not by loyalty but by lack of choice. The Lord's manor is vast, cold, and alarmingly efficient. The reeve there ticks names off a list. You're given a small pallet in a long barn and a job, irrigation ditches. Again with the digging. You do it. Because what choice do you have? But inside, something cracks. Because after years of clawing your way into anonymity, of stitching together a new self from tatters and turnips and kindness, you're suddenly a number again, a hand, a tool. It's not the work that hurts. It's the fact that you no longer belong to yourself. Let's talk about feudal reclamation. During periods of war, plague, or rebellion, many English manors fell into de facto independence. The laborers ran things, the fields stayed tended, the lords were distant figures on coins. But every so often, a noble would return flush with power or debt and try to reassert control, sometimes violently, sometimes just through paperwork. And in medieval law, that was often enough. Once a name was written down, obligation followed. To deny it was to deny the king's order. To run was to become outlawed again. And that's what you're facing now. A noble who claims you, a reeve who marks you, and a world where saying, "I'm not who you think I am," is a worse crime than being a thief. So you bide your time. You work the ditch. You eat their pottage. You watch. You learn the schedule of the guards. You count the horses. You wait for the moonless night. And when it comes, you walk. Not run. Not flee. Just walk. Silently. Deliberately. Back into unclaimed land. It takes 4 days. You hide in barns, trade labor for bread, cut through forests where the laws are thinner. Once you see a patrol in the distance, you crouch behind a hedgerow and hold your breath until the stars feel too close. But no one catches you. Because you know how to disappear. You arrive at a different village, this time. Smaller, stranger, unfamiliar. You use a new name, Martin. You say little. You dig wells. You avoid the church for a while, then slowly creep back. And within a season, you belong again. Because even though the system chased you, claimed you, tried to reduce you, you slipped it. Again. Not through violence. Not through forgiveness. But through movement. Historians often call this period a time of shifting loyalties. But for people like you, it wasn't loyalty that shifted. It was identity itself. Who you were depended on where you stood, whose role you were on, and how long you could keep your head down before the next lord decided he missed your sweat. But you've learned the game. You've become the kind of man who can rebuild himself in any soil. And someday, maybe soon, you'll stop running altogether. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight you sleep under stars, your shovel tucked close. And the law sleeps elsewhere. You wake to frost. Not snow, not ice, just a thin shimmer that turns the grass silver and the air knife-sharp in your lungs. Winter is arriving, not all at once, but with that creeping certainty that soon your fingers will crack and fires will burn low. You pull your cloak tighter. The village is just beginning to stir. And with it, the reeve. Not your reeve. You've changed villages again. New name, new rhythm, new lies. But reeves, no matter where you go, seem carved from the same scowling oak. This one's younger than most, ambitious, sharp-eyed, always carrying a little wax tablet, always scribbling. He's planning something, you can feel it. And then, one day, you hear the word you've dreaded since your return. Tithing. Let's rewind. You remember tithings from your first brush with justice. Groups of 10 households, mutual responsibility. If one of you sinned, all of you answered for it. The idea was simple. Let the people police themselves. If your neighbor stole a sheep, you'd rat him out rather than risk a fine yourself. On paper, it's brilliant. In practice, it meant guilt by association, collective punishment, and, worst of all, recorded names. This reeve wants to bring tithings back. He's rebuilding the structure, re-establishing roles, assigning groups. Which means, for the first time in years, you're about to be officially entered into someone's book. And that's a problem. Because once your name is written, no matter which name it is, it becomes fixed. And if any cross-referencing happens, any questions arise, well, we know where that leads. You weigh your options. Leave, again. Easy, familiar, but exhausting. You've grown tired of reinventing yourself. Refuse the tithing. A suspicious act, likely to draw more attention. Embrace it. Accept the name. Live within the paper. Let the ink build a version of you that's not quite false. You choose the third. Because maybe, just maybe, you can rewrite your past with silence. The Reeve calls a village meeting. He reads the names, assigns groups. You nod at your new tithing brothers, a pig farmer with 7 children, a thatcher with 1 eye, and a boy who may or may not be part ferret. Your name, when spoken aloud, feels strange. Martin the Wellman. Because you dug a well. And someone called you that once. And now it's official. You sign, well, mark your agreement. And just like that, you are legal. The months pass. Winter deepens. You chop wood, mend roofs, deliver turnips for the woman who's too old to walk to the market. You say little, listen well. And slowly, your new self begins to solidify. No one mentions crime. No one whispers about brands or bread or sanctuary. You're just Martin now. And Martin is helpful, quiet, reliable. The best kind of villager. Then, one night, a traveler arrives. He's thin, dirty, wild-eyed, asks for food, for warmth, for a place to hide. You give him stew. He eats greedily, then looks at you and says, "You've got the look, you've been outside it too." You don't answer. He keeps talking, tells you how he ran from the gallows, how he hid in a wattle fence for 3 days, how he once stole a chicken from a Reeves cart and made soup out of it with nettles and lies. He laughs. You don't. Because you see yourself in him. The old you. And you realize something that chills deeper than the frost. He can't stay. If he stays, he'll be questioned, suspected, watched, and if he brings attention to the village, you'll be questioned too. You're not angry at him. You just can't let him unravel what you've built. So you give him food, show him the road, point him north. He nods, understanding more than you expected. "Good luck, Martin," he says. Not mockingly, just truthfully, and walks on. You watch him go, and for the first time you feel old. Not in body, in soul. Because you've survived so long, twisted your life into so many shapes that now you've become the thing you used to flee. The settled man. The cautious villager. The quiet law-abidder who gently, silently, nudges chaos out of town. It's not betrayal. It's evolution. And in medieval England, that's the only way to win. You go back inside, stir the fire, and whisper a prayer not for justice or safety or even peace. Just continuance. Because that's all survival is now. Keep living. Keep quiet. Keep digging. Spring arrives like a cautious guest, late, damp, and hesitant to commit. But when it finally settles in, it brings life in a rush. Crocuses bloom beside mud-soaked ruts, birds return to eaves with messy optimism, and sheep begin bleating like they've just remembered how sound works. The village exhales. And so do you. Because this time last year, you were a fugitive again. And now, you are, by all appearances, a man of good standing. You're Martin the Wellman. Your name appears on the tithing list. You pay your ale tax. You nod to the Reeve, and he nods back without suspicion. You are, for lack of a better term, normal. Until one morning, when something breaks the rhythm. It's small at first. A merchant arrives from a nearby shire, his cart groaning with salted fish and gossip. He sets up by the green, and the whole village gathers, part for goods, part for stories. You go too, because even a man with secrets needs fresh onions. You're halfway through bartering when someone says, "Have you heard about the new sumptuary laws?" You pause. Because you have heard, everyone has. The merchant grins. It's true. No more velvet for yeomen, no more fur on women who make less than 5 marks. They've banned fancy shoes even, said they're corrupting the souls of the lower orders. You glance around, nobody laughs. Because while it sounds ridiculous, sumptuary laws were very real. Let's explore that. In medieval England, these laws were designed to control appearance, what you wore, what you ate, what you rode. Not because the kingdom cared about fashion, but because clothing signaled class. And when ex-thieves, rising peasants, or newly wealthy merchants began dressing like minor nobles, the system panicked. So Parliament passed laws. You may not wear silk if your income is under 20. You may not wear fur unless you are the son of a knight. You may not eat more than 3 courses unless you're landed gentry. You may not wear shoes with toes longer than 6 inches unless you're nobility. Yes, really. These laws weren't always enforced, but when they were, punishment varied. Fines, public shaming, or being forced to strip on the spot. Some offenders were even dragged to the pillory wearing the offending garment. It was about visibility. Because in a world where documents were rare, and literacy rarer, your body was your identity. And if your clothes lied, you were considered dangerous. You returned to your cottage uneasy. Because you remember, years ago, trying on a discarded doublet too fine for your station. It felt powerful, transformative, a second skin that almost convinced you belonged somewhere better. You never wore it again. Because even back then, you knew, to be seen as more than you are is to be seen as a threat. And now the laws say so too. A week later, a messenger arrives. He's from the sheriff's office, carrying a scroll of enforcement. He reads aloud in the square, full of pomp and mispronunciations. All villagers are to be inspected for violations of class dress. Fines are to be collected, records updated, repeat offenders to be punished. The reeve reads the list. Some villagers chuckle, but others, older women with passed-down gowns, boys who've added feathers to their caps, shift uncomfortably. And you glance at your boots. Not new, but not peasant-made either. A gift from a traveler, bartered years ago. You've worn them so long they feel like part of your feet. But to the law, they are above your station. You remove them that night. You patch your old shoes. You say nothing when the reeve walks by the next day. Because you understand the real danger here. It's not that the law wants to strip you. It's that it wants to define you. Sumptuary laws weren't about preserving order. They were about preserving the illusion that everyone knew their place. And you, survivor of pillories and exile and false names, have made a career out of not being in your place. So you comply, quietly. Not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because you've learned that passing unnoticed is more powerful than any velvet doublet. Still, the injustice burns. You see a woman fined for a necklace her mother gave her. A man shamed for buttons carved from horn, too noble-looking, said the scribe. You help them afterward, quietly, fix fences, mend tools, share stew. Because while the law says you are what you wear, you know better. People are what they do. By midsummer, the scroll is forgotten. The merchant is gone. The reeve loses interest in buttons. And once again, the village settles. You, in patched shoes and a borrowed name, walk the same roads, greet the same people. And every night, you remove your boots before sleep, not out of compliance, but out of habit. Because you've learned. Freedom isn't dressing above your class. Freedom is belonging quietly enough that no one asks what class you are. The summer brings heat that doesn't just warm, it lingers. It settles into the earth, the thatch, the folds of your tunic. The air feels thick, like the world has stopped holding its breath and started sweating instead. With heat comes tempers. The villagers grumble. Chickens lay fewer eggs, dogs snap more often, the ale goes sour faster, and perhaps inevitably a fight breaks out. It's over something small, as these things always are. Two men. One borrowed a hoe, the other claims it was stolen. Neither remembers which week it happened, but words escalate, then fists, then someone throws a bucket. By the time the reeve arrives, the village green looks like a rehearsal for war, albeit one starring elderly laborers and startled goats. And that's when the word appears again. Court. Not the local, friendly, ale-fueled sort. No. This time it's the 100 Court. Let's unravel this. In medieval England, 100 was an administrative division, a grouping of villages overseen by a reeve and, occasionally, a traveling justice. The 100 Court was where serious disputes got dragged when the local tithing couldn't sort them out. It happened every few weeks. It was public, and it kept records. You try to stay out of it. But then the reeve includes you in the list of witnesses. You, who just happened to be fixing a fence when the fight broke out. You, whose name is now written down again. And suddenly, you're back in the system. Not as a criminal. Not even as the accused. But as visible. And in medieval law, visibility is vulnerability. You travel with the others to the court. It's held in the open air beside a lopsided yew tree, attended by a clerk with crooked glasses and a voice like curdled milk. There's a bench for the accused, a table for the scribe, and a rough circle where everyone else watches, muttering and occasionally spitting. The two men argue again. You're asked what you saw. You tell the truth, bland, minimal, carefully boring. The clerk squints at you. You're not from here originally, are you? You shrug, moved after the plague. It's the safest answer. Plague migration explains anything. He nods. Name? Martin the Wellman. He writes it down, ink drying into your current truth. The dispute is resolved with fines and public apologies. No stocks, no whippings, just red faces and a shared bucket of cider later. But the experience leaves a chill. Because now, you're not just on the tithing roll. You're in legal records. Again. And the next time someone wants to know who lives in this shire, they might look you up. And what if they look too far? That night, you sit with the widow near the edge of the fields. She watches you watch the sky. You going to run again? She asks. You don't answer. She nods, then don't. You belong more than most. You look at her. She shrugs. Nobody here has the right name or the right past. That's why we stay here. You smile. And stay. Over the following weeks, you begin to understand the ritual of paperwork. It's not about truth. It's about placement, boxes filled, pages completed, problems sent somewhere else. You learn to exist inside the lines. You offer to help the clerk next time, delivering notices, reading lists, organizing oxen rosters. He accepts. You become part of the paperwork machine. And just like that, your greatest fear, visibility, becomes protection. Because now you're not just a name in a book. You're the one who writes the book. Or helps at least. Which means no one checks you too closely. And anyone who does, well, you know which page to lose. Which line to rephrase. Which chicken to credit to the wrong household. Not out of malice. Out of self-defense. Historians debate how widespread record manipulation was in medieval England. Some claim it was rare, others say it was the only way things ever really worked. But you know the truth. Paper lies, but it lies most kindly in the hands of those who've been harmed by truth before. By autumn, you've become trusted. Not liked, but useful. A man with good handwriting. A man who knows which pig was taxed twice. A man who can make small errors in big places. And in doing so, erase the past gently, like scraping the surface of parchment until the ink fades. You're not proud, but you're alive. And in this world, that's more than enough. The village throws a festival. It's for St. Mildred, allegedly, though no one can quite remember what she did. Something about geese, or fire, or possibly both. But the priest insists the ale is already brewed and the weather is shockingly agreeable, so the village obeys the ancient rule of we feast when we can. Children make garlands from wet grass and wildflowers. Someone brings out a drum that hasn't been tuned since the reign of Edward II. Even the reeve smiles, once, when a sheep steals a cake from the altar. You help build the fire. And you realize, with a strange kind of quiet, that this is the first time in decades you've been at a gathering without checking for exits. No stolen bread. No lawman in the shadows. Just you, standing beside the people who've slowly come to accept you, not for your penance or apologies, but for your usefulness. The fire crackles. The priest mumbles a blessing that turns into a toast halfway through. And someone, Tib's youngest daughter, now taller than you remember, hands you a slice of dark bread and says, "You made the well work again. That's good." You nod and think, that's all I ever wanted. But later that night, as the embers fade and the last song stumbles into silence, a traveler arrives. Not a bard. Not a merchant. A scribe. You notice the ink stains on his cuffs, the careful way he unrolls his sleeping gear, the quiet murmur of Latin beneath his breath as he settles by the church wall. You approach the priest the next day. He shrugs. He's collecting tax census data, some royal initiative. They're cross-checking old hearth rolls against plague-era inventories. You nod, smile, then go back to your cottage and begin packing, because this is it, the final reckoning. Let's step back. Throughout your journey, your survival has hinged on gaps in memory, in law, in paperwork, in people's willingness to care. But a royal census? That's different. Because it looks backward, it checks, it corrects. And worst of all, it unerases. Names you thought forgotten reappear on lists. Punishments long since buried are retallied, matched against new populations. You know your alias could be cracked, not by malice, but by a man with good eyes and too much time. So you do what you've always done. You leave. It hurts more this time. You're older. Slower. People will miss you. But you don't say goodbye. You never do. Because if you did, it would turn your life here into a chapter. And you prefer it as a home that continued without you. The road is familiar. Even the trees seem to recognize your tread. You find work quickly, manor house needing repairs on its outer wall. You tell them you're a freeman from the East. That's vague enough. You're assigned a cot, a bucket, and 2 meals a day. The steward is kind. But you feel the difference. You're outside again. Just a little. Not distrusted, but not yet real to them either. One night, a young man with a limp sits beside you. He tells you his story. He once stole a cartload of eels, was nearly branded, escaped during a riot, hasn't used his birth name since. You nod. Don't laugh. And when he asks your story, you lie. But not fully. You say, I once got caught stealing something small. Took me 20 years to stop paying for it. He winces. Then says, worth it. You think. Then nod. Eventually. Historians often imagine medieval criminals as doomed, branded, buried under law. But the truth is stranger and softer, because the law was everywhere, and yet thin. If you knew where to bend it, where to kneel, where to stand, where to vanish, you did what you had to do. And if you were lucky and persistent, you found the space to rebuild. You never return to the village. You never see the well again. But years later, you hear of a man called Martin the Good, who once fixed it and then disappeared. Children say he had magical hands, that he spoke goat, that he made bread appear from rocks. You laugh. Alone. Then go back to work. Because stories are nice. But survival, quiet, earned, and just slightly dishonest, is better. You are dying. Not dramatically, not quickly, but definitely, undeniably. Your knees creak like rotted hinges, your breath rattles more than its size, and your hands, which once swung hammers, turned soil, and slipped bread from stalls, now tremble when lifting a wooden spoon. You don't mind. You've had a good run, a long run, longer than most who lived the life you did. You're in a cottage now, shared with a widow who never asked questions and a cat that doesn't recognize you half the time. The hearth stays warm. Your name, whichever one you're using this season, is spoken kindly. And that's more than you ever hoped for. Your story, if anyone asked, would sound too strange to be true. A thief who became a servant. A prisoner who became a priest's assistant. A vagabond who helped build wells and fix fences, and once nearly got arrested for owning the wrong kind of shoes. But no one asks. And you don't offer. Because you know the most important lesson of all. Quiet is safer than truth. Sometimes the younger villagers come to sit by your fire. They ask about the old days, the bad winters, the raids, the time the ox got drunk and wandered into the mill. You give them stories. Never lies. But never the whole truth either. You tell them how justice used to work, how people were put in stocks for stealing eggs, how a loaf of bread could change a life, how neck verses were once memorized like prayers. They laugh. They don't believe you. You let them laugh. Because that's what time does. It softens edges, turns sharp memories into rounded tales. And that's how history survives. As whispers. One day, you don't get out of bed. You stare at the rafters. You trace the cracks with your eyes. You remember the first time you saw stars from a ditch, cold and terrified, with your name branded only in someone's memory. You think, I made it. Not gloriously. Not cleanly. But fully. That night, the priest visits. Not the old priest or the young one, a new one, always new. He sits beside you. Says your name. You correct him gently. And he says, that's not what's written. You smile. And say, it is now. He doesn't press. Just offers you final rites. You decline. I've had enough holy buildings for one life. And then quietly, gently, with a long final exhale, you stop. No gallows. No guards. No stocks. Just a blanket, a cat, and the faint smell of herbs on the hearth. The villagers bury you beneath the yew tree. They carve a name into the stone. Not the right one, not the first one, but one you wore long enough that it fit. They say he was kind. He could fix anything. He never spoke out of turn. They do not say he once fled justice. Or He survived by forgetting himself. Because that part is gone, erased by kindness, routine, and time. And so ends your life. The life of a criminal, of a servant, of a laborer, of a ghost who learned to be solid again, of a man who found a way to belong in a world designed to forget him, of a soul stitched back together, thread by quiet thread. So here we are, at the end of the road. You've traveled far tonight through mud, fear, hunger, hope, exile, and something very close to peace. Maybe you saw yourself in parts of that journey. Maybe you just needed the stillness. Either way, you made it. You outlasted the system, outweighted the noise, and slipped gently into a world where names stop mattering and the air smells like baked bread and old wood. Let your breath slow now. Let your thoughts drift like ash from a dying fire. The world is quieter here. Time moves gently now. There are no laws to fear. Only soft earth, familiar stars, and a memory of someone who once outran the worst of it, and became simply human again. Good night, and sleep well.